Okay, friends, I am back for part 2 of personal possessive adjectives, and this next section, section 12.4, actually we are going to talk specifically about third person possessive adjectives. That's because we've actually already learned first person and second person. First person singular are the meus, mea, meum that we have already had on a previous vocab list. Tuus, tua, tuum, those are the singulars of first person and second person. In the previous section from this, in the last section I was just talking to you about, we spent time declining and learning the plurals. First person plural, which would be our, we would translate it our. That's the whole nostri, nostra, nostrum business. And then the vestri, vestrum business, that's second person plural. That's your, as in all y'alls. That belongs to all y'all. So those we have already done. She indicates for you here, you have been introduced to these. You have been using these. What we need to look at is the third person. And if you were to go back and look at chapter 5, lesson 5 in big book number 2 here, when we first introduced pronouns, you would see that she indicates there are special usages for the genitives in third person pronouns. This is the chapter we're going to talk about that. We didn't do that back then. Now we're going to do that. And that's because there's a few extra special things to take into consideration. This is just detail work. It's nothing worth stressing you out. It's just detail work, and it's a puzzle that's interesting to put together. Or in our case, as opposed to putting it together, we're more taking apart what she's built. She's trying to help us fill in the blanks to understand how these things fit together. I would probably recommend highlighting the things that I highlighted on this page, which is page 501, because this is the most relevant information to you. I would recommend looking at that. So I put together a few tips for us to keep in mind that I think are helpful, that sort of go along and echo this. And let's just get to those real quick. My second video I'll put together, I've got a couple of example sentences we can work through. Okay, this is third person, and we're talking specifically about possessive adjectives in the third person and reflexive adjectives in the third person. Okay, so first of all, you always have to remember when dealing with adjectives, adjectives must agree with the noun it is modifying in G and C. Okay? That's any adjective. That's the same with possessive adjectives. Possessive adjectives must also agree with the noun they are modifying in G and C. Another tip that we learned last time, remember that possessive adjectives do not agree with the noun that possesses them. Okay? This can be confusing. If I'm talking about my dog or my cat, my dog, that is a personal possessive adjective. It needs to match in G and C the dog in gender number case. It's not necessarily matching me in gender number case. Okay? So that's the thing to keep in mind, is gender number case refers to the noun that's being modified for the adjective. Now this gets it's the same rule applies, it just gets a little different when we start to think about what the subject of the sentence is, or the antecedent. Remember, pronouns deal with antecedents. Pronouns are created so to avoid repetition, so we don't keep saying Shannon's dog, Ren's rabbit, over and over again. We can say her rabbit. That's how that works. The antecedent is, for her, in this case, would be Ren. So if the adjective is reflexive, that means that it is reflecting back to the antecedent, or most likely in the work we're doing, generally most likely to the subject of the sentence. Okay, it's reflecting back. So in English, Our reflexives are myself, yourself, herself, himself, themself. That's how that works out. So if I look at myself in the mirror, it's exactly that. I look at myself in the mirror. Who am I looking at? Myself, the self of me, okay? If you were looking in the mirror as a second person, you were looking at yourself in the mirror. It's reflecting back at you. That's why it's called reflexive. So we translate this mostly in Latin. I tend to think of it as of myself, or as of himself, or of herself, as I'm trying to figure out if this is reflexive or not. Okay? She translates this as his own. Is this belonging to, is this her own? Is this his own? And that's one way to think of that. If that's the case and it's reflective, we're going to use something different. Suus, sua, suum. This is actually where the word suicide comes from. When you're committing suicide, you are killing yourself. It's reflexive back at you. So this is where that word suicide comes from. This is what we will use for our adjective if it's reflexive, okay? If the noun belongs to someone else, then we're going to use the third person genitive possessive. This is where that genitive comes in, okay? In that case, we're going to use the ones that we already know, the is, ia, id. We've already learned these, okay? We've already learned these, and we're going to use them in the genitive, third person. You're going to find those on the bottom of your chant sheet. This is where all those pronouns are, okay? So that's where you're going to find all of these. In this case, with the pronoun adjective referring to someone else, when it refers to someone else in the sentence, okay, not the antecedent, not the subject of the sentence, not referring to the genitive form, it's going to get its number and gender from the person that owns the noun, okay? So this is where the exception comes in, because remember, Romans are crazy. There's always an exception. This is where that exception is to that adjective rule. That's because these are they're not really adjectives. They're kind of adjectives in our language, but they're possessives in Latin. These are actually possessives, and if it's a possessive, we're going to use it in the genitive form. That's why this is tricky in the third person, okay? The gender and number is going to pull from who it belongs to, okay, because we already know that the case. So we're going to pull the gender and number from whom it belongs to, and it's going to be in the genitive case already. So that's our GNC. That's what makes it different. I don't feel like she does a lot of this in her exercises because it can kind of be confusing. She does have us working with that genitive form, okay? But pay attention to your endings. Don't be dismayed if you're not getting these all right, the first time. This is why you work with your answer key next to you and check and see what's going on, okay? That has to do with who possesses the noun. So in this case, it does reflect who's possessing the noun. In the next video, we'll go over a couple of sentences to help you see this, okay?